I was born on a cold November night in 1819 in Henderson County, North Carolina. The cold mountain air blew without restriction through the cracks between the walls of our cabin, causing the flames to dance back and forth in the fireplace. There was no gathering of relatives or the assistance of a doctor to aid in my safe passage into this world on this night. Instead, it was just my ma and pa working together by the dim light of the fireplace. My tiny voice cried for the first time as my father cut the cord with his pocket knife and placed me in my mother's arms, wrapped in a quilt that she had made from scraps of fabric. A few hours later, the morning sun shone through those same cracks and illuminated my face for my parents to see me for the first time. "Look, Hiram, she's got pretty blue eyes," my mom said, "and she's going to have plenty of smarts. Look how wide her forehead is." My pa nodded in agreement as he studied my face. "A pretty gal like that needs a pretty name. We'll call her Polly." It was in this one-room log cabin that my father had built with his own hands where I'd spend my childhood. My pa's name was Hiram King, and though he was a rugged mountaineer, his father before him had taught him how to read and write as a boy. But the truth is, there was little need for those skills back in those days. For one, we never owned a book in the house other than the Bible. And two, Pa spent his days working sun up to sundown, working the crops and tending the animals and hunting. Heck, by the time he ate supper each night, he was so tired that he didn't have any use for trivial things like reading. It was for that reason that he never taught me to read. Instead, I was raised like all mountain girls back then. We worked harder than the boys. We tended to all the animals and worked the fields just like they did. But we also churned the butter, carried the water, cooked the meals, made the clothes, and tended to the cabin too. By the time I was a teen, I worked circles around all my brothers. Now don't get me wrong, I ain't complaining. This was the reality of life, and we had never met a lazy person. In fact, if there was ever one who existed, I'll tell you this, he wouldn't exist for long back then, because if you didn't do it for yourself, you did without. And I was thankful for the skills that I learned on how to live off the bounty of what nature provided. And Pa, he was a master teacher. He taught me about all the plants and the trees, how to train a good horse, how to hunt, farm, and most of all, how to take care of folks you care about. And it was normal for folks to marry young back then, considering the average lifespan was barely more than 40 years. You had to get an early start, especially if you wanted to be around long enough to see your youngins grow up. So I was married at 16 years old to a fella named John Justice. And folks called him the peacemaker because he was a gentle soul who never lost his temper, no matter how heated the situation got. He had a way about him and a reputation as a mediator. John could solve disputes between men who were bitter rivals, and many times bloodshed was avoided due to his skills. Just like my mother and hers before her, there was no such thing as a doctor when my first child was born. Although I was just 16, I handled the birth all by myself while John was away at work. Yet, within a few days, my son's umbilical cord became infected and wouldn't heal. Now back then, many a child had died because of this, and I was really worried. Each day, it got worse, and he began to get weak, so weak that he could barely eat, and I didn't know what to do, until one night, I had a dream. Now I know some of you folks don't believe in things like this, but I tell you, it's the truth. A voice spoke to me just as clear as I'm speaking to you now, and it told me to go to the woods past Bull's Gap and collect certain herbs that grew on the side of the creek, then to climb to the top of Hawk's Ridge and collect leaves from a sapling that only grew in the shadow of the chestnut tree, then to dig for roots that only grew near a laurel thicket, and then to take the bark of a sassafras tree. The voice told me to bring all of these medicines home and to boil them in water over the fireplace. And once the liquid cooled, to apply it continuously to my son's sore and to keep it wet with a concoction for 3 days. When I opened my eyes from the dream, I knew I had to do exactly what I was told, so I did. I went and gathered the roots, bark, and leaves, and I boiled it just like I was instructed to do. And miraculously, after 3 days of applying this medicine to my son's festering wound, the infection was gone, and a few days later, he was healed. The more I thought about it, I was more and more assured that it was the voice of God that saved my son, and I felt compelled to use this knowledge to help others. You see, our area was sparsely populated. There was no such thing as doctors or drugstores, and for every 2 babies that were born, only one of them would see their first birthday. So that fall, John brought back several books on plants that he purchased on his trip down to the valley, and for the next few months, he would read those books to me every night by the firelight. Over and over again, he would read them, and each time the sun rose the next day, I would roam the forest until I'd located each plant. This repeated itself over and over until I knew where every plant, tree, herb, and bark of medical value was located in the wilderness, in a time when there was no such thing as women doctors. Slowly, I had learned how to mix each of these medicines to cure all sorts of sicknesses, and before long, folks began calling me Dr. Polly. That's right. Dr. Polly became famous all over the hills and hollers of North Carolina. She was a skilled horse rider, and it was a common sight to see her ripping down a trail, riding side straddle on a bear hide atop her horse, rushing to the aid of some poor soul suffering from the fever, or setting broken bones from an injured logger, or rushing to the aid of a sick baby, in a time when there was no such thing as modern medicine in these mountains, mainly because it would take weeks to transport it from the closest towns over and through the vast wilderness. Dr. Polly kept a saddlebag full of medicines that she had made from the bounty of nature. Now, prior to the war between the states, Polly was famous for riding her favorite horse, a black stallion, to the aid of the sick and the helpless. Yet, when the war broke out, Union soldiers came through and stole all the mountaineers' horses. When General Stoneman of Sherman's cavalry saw Polly's black stallion, he had to have it. Yet, the beast was notoriously stubborn to everybody except Polly or Jim. The soldiers tried over and over again to saddle the horse, to no avail, as the horse bucked and kicked and resisted. Finally, they put a gun to John's head and forced him to saddle the horse and lead it out of the stable. Just like that, Dr. Polly's famous horse was stolen and taken away to the bloody war, never to be seen again. Polly was devastated, so John bought her a beautiful white horse, even more magnificent than the black stallion, and from that day on, she was seen galloping to the scene of countless medical emergencies on her white horse. Polly never refused any patients, and she never earned a dime from her services. But no matter if it was day or night, she could be seen dashing through the wilderness, even in the dead of the winter in the middle of a snowstorm, to the top of Sugarloaf Mountain, or galloping through the gaps on her way to Bear Wallow. And as she aged, she became feisty and feared no beast of the forest, as she rode with her horse and her cornpipe packed with homegrown tobacco firmly clenched between her teeth. During her lifetime, Dr. Polly had 13 children of her own, with 9 of them living into adulthood. She devoted her entire life to helping others. Her husband John died when he was 95 years old in 1901, and 3 years later, Dr. Polly, who was 83 years old, was laid to rest right beside him and both her parents in King Cemetery in Henderson County, North Carolina. Her tombstone reads, Dr. Polly King Justice. She dedicated her life to the sick and the afflicted. And now, my friends, you know the rest of the story on Mary Jane King Justice, who everyone knew as Dr. Polly. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe button for more stories on Appalachia's past.